This is chapter 4, verses 58 and 59. And their English translation is, "Surely Allah commands you to make over trusts to those worthy of them, and that when you judge between people, you judge with justice. Surely Allah admonishes you with what is excellent. Surely Allah is ever hearing, ever seeing. O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those in authority from among you. Then if you quarrel about anything, refer it to Allah and the Messenger if you believe in Allah and the last day. This is the best and the most suitable to achieve the end." I thought of this khutbah when we were driving back to Slough on Wednesday after the meeting at the House of Commons. And what brought to mind this verse was what happened quite a long time ago. Some of you will remember that it was in 1961 that the German Nazi was taken to Israel. His name was Adolf Eichmann, which was an unfortunate name, Adolf, under the circumstances, but there we are. And he had been kidnapped and taken to Israel by Israeli agents, and he was put on trial. Now, his trial raised many questions in people's minds. When early Nazis were tried, it was immediately after the war, and no one questioned their guilt, that these people were personally responsible for everything that happened. But this was 1961, and people were beginning to ask things like, for example, that can we really believe that these people, not just this man himself, Eichmann, but also millions who joined him in killing people during the Holocaust in death camps and gas chambers and so on, could they be accomplices? Were they just following orders? Should we treat them as perpetrators or as accomplices? What should be done? Are they responsible for what they did? And should they be punished for it? And it was to answer these questions that a psychologist at Yale University called Stanley Milgram, he devised and he conducted some psychological social experiments. And he wanted to see whether he could come up with some statistical data to answer what people were asking. And since that time, those experiments have been repeated in many cultures, in many countries across the globe. And it has been very interesting that whatever culture you go to, wherever you are on this globe, the results are very similar. They're not the same, they are very similar. And of course, these days, his experiments were so controversial that these days they would be regarded as being unethical, and no one would be allowed to conduct such experiments because it was felt that they actually caused the people who took part in those experiments, those experiments caused them psychological damage. Now, these experiments were called experiments on obedience to authority. And there were a series of experiments, And basically, what Milgram wanted to test was this, that how willing would an ordinary man be to obey an authority figure when they were asked to do something that conflicted with their personal beliefs, that even contradicted what they held to be moral actions or acts that people should follow. And Milgram then published these in 1963 in a journal, and then 10 years later he published a book called Obedience, in which he described his research in detail. Now, his experiment was very simple. He would take one man and put him in one room, and we'll call this man the student. And he'll attach electrical electrodes to this man. He'll take another man and he'll put this man in a different room. Now, the two would be able to see each other through a window and hear each other, but that was all. They wouldn't be able to touch each other or communicate in any other way. This other man we will call the teacher. The teacher will ask the student a question. And if the question was wrong, if the answer was wrong, then the teacher would give the student an electric shock. So then the teacher will ask the student another question. And if the student was wrong again, he will get another electric shock, but this time what happened was that it will be a more severe electric shock. The voltage will be increased. And of course, the student would suffer pain, and they would scream, and they would shout, and they would cry, and they would beg for mercy. But the teacher had an instructor with him, a man in a white coat with a board, who said to him, "No, ask him another question. If he gets it wrong, you have to up the voltage and you have to give him another electric shock." It doesn't matter how much the student is screaming, how much he is shouting, how much pain he is feeling, you have to do what I tell you to do. And it so turned out that most of the teachers ignored the screams of the student, their begging and their pleas for mercy, and they continued to give them electric shocks of increasing severity, even to the point that the last shocks were so severe that they would kill them. And they did it. They could see these people begging for mercy. They could see that these people were in pain. All of that was patently obvious to these teachers. But because this man who was in authority over them, who had a white coat and a clipboard, he said, "No, you have to do what I say." And they knew it was wrong. This was happening in America. They knew it was wrong to inflict pain on others. But they carried on doing it. Now, the interesting thing is that the students were actually actors. And they weren't actually getting electric shocks. The teachers were the people who were the subject of this study, although they didn't realize that. It looked to them, when they turned the dial, as if the voltage went up. It looked to them as if these people were getting an electric shock, because they started screaming and shouting and crying, etc. But the point is this: the people who were carrying out this torture, the teachers, despite the fact that they saw these students in such pain, crying and screaming and begging for mercy, because they were told to do this by this authority figure, by this man in this white coat and with this board, they would continue to do it. And in fact, Milgram, when he summarized his work, he said this: the legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous importance, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. Well, we know, we say it's morally wrong to do this sort of thing. But what will happen when we are told to do it? Will we do it or not? I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to, as part of an experiment. And these people, more often than not, they did it. Because this man, because you see, human beings have this weakness for authority. This man tells me to, he's my boss, he's the policeman, he's the doctor, he's the teacher, he's the whatever, I must do whatever he says. Even when I know it is wrong to do it, because I'm being told by a person in authority that I must do so, then I will do it. And it was to test whether this thing would happen. And he went on to say, ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear to them, and they're asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the strength to say no. Were these just laboratory experiments? Does this happen in real life? We know it does happen in real life. As Ahmadis, we experience this every day. As Ahmadis, we have been experiencing this since 1974. The man doesn't have a clipboard or a white coat. He has a beard and a turban. He goes to these people and he says, kill these Ahmadis, burn their houses, torture them, inflict pain on them. And despite the fact that a lot of these people who do it are good people, they're decent people, they even regard Ahmadis as being good Muslims, some of them. But because this figure in authority says to them, this mullah with a beard and a turban says to them, go and do it. Even though they may believe it to be the wrong thing to do, they succumb to his orders. Yes, Azhar says they're helpless. They are helpless. They become like mesmerized, like hypnotized. They can't help themselves. Just like those teachers in that experiment, they saw this student groveling, screaming in pain, begging for mercy, begging for them to stop. But because this authority figure, this man in the white coat, he said no, increase the voltage and give him another shock, they would do it. So his experiment, Milgram's experiment, wasn't just an experiment in a laboratory. It happens every day. It happens all over the world. And we, the Ahmadis, certainly those of our brothers and sisters living in Pakistan, are the lab rats who suffer this. And this is why, if we go back to the verses of the Holy Quran that I recited to you, there's such profound wisdom in them. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wasn't a psychologist. He wasn't a psychiatrist. He knew that a society does not stand still, that it changes. He knew that new laws will need to be made to cater for new situations. And he knew that the people making those laws will be morally and spiritually much inferior to the Holy Prophet and his companions. There will be no Umar among them who, when offered in the cathedral in Jerusalem, why don't you pray here, will say, because the generations that come after will knock down this cathedral and turn it into a mosque. Why? They will say, Umar prayed here. There will be no Umar, Raziyallahu Ta'ala. And that is why it says, number one, you're going to obey these authority figures. So be very, 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 very careful who you give that authority to. Only to those people who deserve it. Only to those people with high moral and spiritual characters. But even so, even those people may make mistakes. Even those people may impose upon you a burden asking you to do those things which you consider to be morally wrong, and you may do them because human beings tend to follow authority figures. So what you are asked to do something, do not do it. Return it to the Book of Allah. Ask, would God want me to go out and kill Ahmadis? Ask, would God want me to go out and burn their homes? Ask whether God would want me to torture their women and children? And if the answer is yes, if the Quran says yes, if the Holy Prophet has said yes, then do it. Do not bow to the authority of human beings. Always use this measure to test it against, and that measure is the Book of Allah and what the Holy Prophet said and what the Holy Prophet did. I'm always amazed at the magnificence and the beauty and the simplicity of the commands and messages of the Holy Quran. I had read these verses many times, but until I did some research, until I heard that radio program on the way to Slough, it never occurred to me why it was so important that Allah should command us not to succumb to authority of other human beings, but to test what they are saying, what they're asking us to do against divine commands and the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. Now just think, if everyone did that, how much killing would have been avoided? There would have been no opium wars against the Chinese to force a whole nation of hundreds of millions of people to become drug addicts. There would have been no killing of Red Indians in America so that the white man becomes and rules supreme. There would have been no Holocaust before the Second World War. There would not have been millions killed in post-war Russia because one man in authority, Stalin, ordered their killing. Just think about all these events which, acting on this simple command, would have prevented. And marvel at the glory of the teachings of the Holy Quran.